Yep, this is one way we could do the video, sure. Maybe, I don't know. Did the lights just go out? Hi everyone, I am Robin the Copy Bitch. This is Stewie, my sidekick sloth. Maybe my Grinch too? And today we're going to talk about how to conduct an interview for an article, a blog post, a white paper, a guide. Yes, you get the idea, right? First, let's talk about how interviews in copywriting land differ from journalism land. If you're coming from a journalistic background, you might be wondering, okay, what's it like? Is it similar? It is similar, but here's some good news for you. If you are a former journalist or you're coming from that mindset, I did some freelancing in the early part of my career. The good news is you're going to be dealing with interview subjects who actually want to talk to you. And I know that's not always the case when you're a journalist. So it's going to really reduce the stress in theory and reduce any tension. So the people you'll be talking to for said blog posts and guides and white papers, they will typically be your clients or someone from within your client's company, because here's a refresher, remember what copywriting is. It's writing that sells a product, a service, or a cause. And here's the thing, clients are going to be invested in what you're doing, so they're going to want to participate in theory. And just a word of advice, you definitely want to make sure when you're writing content for your clients, whether it's a blog post or a newsletter article or a white paper or a guide, any content, always ask to talk to a subject matter expert from within the company, because they are going to give you a perspective that you're not going to be able to get on your own just doing research. So that is critical. And if a client is ever hesitant about talking to you or giving you someone to talk to for the work you're doing, try to push back a little bit, because that is really going to make the difference in the content that you produce for them. So how is copywriting and doing an interview for a piece of copywriting similar to journalism? A way that it will be similar is if you are not someone who likes to do interviews, you might be nervous doing it. And let's face it, we writers tend to be introverts. We like to sit by ourselves in a room and just write, right? So I know that doing interviews can be really, really intimidating. It was for me. It still can be depending on who I talk to. Just know that it's normal to feel that way. You're not alone, but it is part of the copywriting game, and you will get better at it the more you do it. And it's going to make your job easier ultimately, because if you get that interview down and you get some really great quotes and great tidbits to put in your content, it's really going to make it shine. So it's worth the effort. I do recommend talking to people in person or via phone. You can conduct some email interviews if you want. It won't be the same because you won't be able to do those follow-up questions. People are going to try to be a little more polished because they're going to probably read through their answers before they send them to you and make adjustments. Whereas when you're just talking to someone on the phone or in person or via Zoom, you'll kind of get them in some of those, freewheeling moments, those casual moments. And that can be the source of some really rich and rewarding material for your content. Keep in mind too that your interview subject might be nervous. So people within companies, if you're talking to like an engineer in a manufacturing company, or you're talking to a doctor in a urology practice, or you're talking to a lawyer who works as in-house counsel for a background check company, they might not be used to talking to members of the press or a copywriter or anything like that. So they might be nervous too. So keep that in mind when you're talking to them. And your job as the interviewer is to put your interview subject at ease. So when you set up the interview, you want to make it easy for them. First of all, be clear with your expectations. Send them a calendar invite. Develop your questions in advance. I do recommend doing that both for your interview subject, but also for you. Now, I know that there are some writers out there of nonfiction or from the journalism bent who might not always develop their questions in advance. Sometimes they just want to see where, the conversation goes and let it happen organically. When you have a very specific purpose, and you'll have a specific angle that you're going to be talking about for your article, for your blog post, for your white paper, it makes sense to develop questions around that. And that might require you to do some research. And then as a courtesy, send the questions by email to your interview subject so they have time to noodle on them. Oh, noodles. I wouldn't overwhelm them with questions, so probably don't send more than 10 to 15, even if you really have 20, but try to get the biggest, most important ones that would require them to, the most noodle time. You want to give them that courtesy to have time to think about it. That'll make them more comfortable, and it probably will make for a better interview ultimately because they've had time to consider your questions. Again, you're not writing some sort of news article. You're actually writing a piece of content that's supposed to, do something, get someone who's reading it to act, whether it's to buy a product or subscribe to a blog post or to take an action of some sort. So the content is incredibly purposeful. It might be educational in nature depending on where it is in that sales funnel, but still it's going to have a specific focus. So it makes sense to develop your questions in advance and send them to your interview subject, okay? When you're setting your expectations with your interview subject, let them know how you're going to conduct the interview. Are you doing it on the phone? Are you doing it on Zoom? If you're using Zoom, do they have to be on camera? Do they have to wear pants? Or can it just be audio? Usually what I do, I do use Zoom, but I very rarely have my camera on, and I leave it up to the person whether they want their camera on. In a post-pandemic world or, pre-pandemic world, people never had their camera on. Now people are so used to having their camera on that they often will just keep it on, and that's fine. I don't, because that's just too stressful for me. Plus, I'd have to wear pants. But you just want to set expectations. Let people know that, hey, we're going to do this via Zoom. You don't have to have your camera on. I am going to record it, and you should record it because here's why. It's not just to make your life easier, although it will. And when you record it, you should record it both on Zoom, but you should also use your phone as a backup. Use the memo function or its equivalent as a backup. And if you're going to a place, or if you're going somewhere in person and you're talking to someone, bring your phone, because you're not going to be using Zoom, but then also bring a backup device like this. For the youngins in the office are probably going, oh, what is that? It's a recorder. Totally old school. Maybe I'm not the copy bitch, I'm the copy crone. The reason why you want to record is because you are going to conduct a better interview. I always joke to my interview subjects, I always tell them I'm recording because I can never read my own handwriting when I'm taking notes, which is actually true. But here's the thing. If you're so focused on taking notes, you are going to miss something that the interviewer or the interview subject says that's going to be, worthy of a follow-up question or something that you want to home in on and run with that maybe you weren't expecting. If you're so busy taking notes, your mind just can't do that. At least mine can't. Maybe somebody's can, but mine really can't do that split where I'm listening really intently and taking notes really well. So if you are recording, it takes the pressure off. I still think you should take some notes, and you do you. If you want to take more notes, if you're really good at kind of that multitasking, go for it. But know that you're recording, have that backup device. So whenever I record on Zoom, I'm always recording on my phone as well, the memo function. And then if I'm in person, I have my little, handheld recorder as well. So in case one craps out, I'm covered. But being able to focus on the interview subject, it's just going to make for a better interview. You're going to be thinking of things, you'll think of a follow-up question, or, oh gosh, they brought up something that you want to make sure that you go with, or you hadn't thought of that. You'll be able to do that much more easily because the interview is being recorded, so you don't have to worry about taking notes or missing something important. So take the time to do that. It's worth it. Get into the habit. I always warn people ahead of time that I'm recording this, and I always joke, hey, nothing will be used against you in a court of law. That always elicits a chuckle or two and puts people at ease. I think legally you're actually supposed to do that depending on what state you're in. I know Zoom actually says at the beginning that this call is being recorded, so at least people are aware of that. I've never had someone ask to be not recorded, to be off the record. Like I said, this is a little bit different than dealing with a source for a journalistic piece because these people are invested. They're probably from your client's company, and they want to participate and they want to do this piece and they want to get it out there and get it out there right. Resist the temptation to bring yourself into the interview or to make the interview about you. I've seen this happen before back in my radio days where interviews just go off the rails and it becomes about the person who's actually, the interviewer rather than the interviewee. And it's easy to do, but there's no reason, especially as a copywriter writing for a client company, there's no reason for you probably to bring yourself into it. I'm sure there's probably an exception to the rule, but again, make it about your interview subject rather than yourself. So just keep that in mind as well. Get in the habit of pausing and taking a deep breath. Don't be afraid of silences and don't rush to fill them in. If anything, let the interview subject fill in. Try to get into that habit. It's very easy to get overwhelmed as you're doing the interview to just want to race through the questions, or you don't want to stop and double check because you feel that might be unprofessional or shows that you're not paying attention. That's not the case. You've been listening to a lot of stuff, you've been digesting it. It's natural to say, that's great. Let's just hold on for a second. I want to double check my questions and see where we're at. Okay, so don't feel bad about doing it. It's a good step to take. Always clarify with your interview subjects how they should be referenced in print. Debbie versus Deborah, get their titles. You can always follow up with them via email, but it's kind of good to just get that in one fell swoop if you can. As for best practices for the types of questions you should ask, open-ended questions. You don't need yes or no questions, so you want to ask an open-ended question that gets people talking. Again, you're not going to be dealing with an antagonistic interview subject, so they're probably going to be happy to talk, and even if you by some chance ask a yes or no question, they probably will say yes, but, or no, but, and they'll probably fill it in. But just get in the habit of asking those open-ended questions. Don't be afraid to ask for clarification. If someone is talking about something and you're not sure you understand, this is the place to say, oh, okay, can we just go back and make sure I understand that? Can you elaborate, maybe provide an example? Sometimes I'll even say, let's pretend I'm 10 and can you try explaining to me as if I'm a 10-year-old? And people usually get, okay, I need to dumb this down a little bit, which is natural, especially if it's a complex topic. They know their topic really well, but you as the lay copywriter, you might not. And that's okay, because your job more than likely is to explain it to an audience who's very much like you, unless you're talking, technical writing. But even then, you want to make sure you understand the nuts and bolts. Don't be afraid to ask for clarification. A great question to end the interview. Say some variation of, okay, was there something that you were expecting me to ask that I didn't ask? And see what they say. Or you could say something to the effect, if there's one thing you want the reader of this article to take away, what would it be? Let them fill in the blank. Just pause, be quiet, and let them say something. Or you could also ask, is there anything else that you want to make sure we convey? Again, this is not a journalistic piece, so they can direct. Maybe they forgot about something, or maybe that'll force them to think through their points and they'll come up with a thing. Always end your interview with some form of that question, because 9 times out of 10, if not 10 out of 10, someone will be like, oh yeah, that reminds me, or oh, make sure, or they'll just reiterate a point that they maybe made earlier, but they'll say it in a different way or a fresher way. So it's always worthwhile to ask one version of those questions or all of those questions. When the interview is over, you should also set expectations as to what happens next. Typically, as a freelance copywriter, you will write up the piece, whether it's a blog post or a white paper or a newsletter article, whatever it is, and you will send it to the person who you just interviewed to review, to redline, to make corrections, because that's a big difference from journalism land and copywriting land. In journalism land, that would be a huge no-no. The person who was interviewed doesn't get to correct their quotes. They are on the record. What they said is what they said. But in copywriting land, where it's a little more control because it's all about marketing and marketing content, the interview subject will want to review for accuracy. And that's a common practice. They might redline the article, you might get on the phone with them to go over and just set that expectation. You can actually set the directive. You could say in your email, I'll be following up with you in a week or two with a copy of the article or with the first draft, and you can, put your changes and track changes, or we can get on the phone and talk through them. So however you want to do it. And different people will have different ways. Some people will redline the article, some people will want to talk to you. Some people might not have any changes at all, and they'll be like, yep, that looks good. So You'll see what happens and you'll get better at it and you'll get a feel for it. Of course, right after you finish the interview, a really classy thing to do would be to send a thank you email to the person you just talked to, thanking them for their time, reiterating the next steps just so they have it in writing. It's just a nice little touch because they've taken time out of their day to talk to you. And yes, it is beneficial to them, but still, it takes time. They have to be on, all that sort of good stuff. So say thank you. It's never bad form to say thank you. Right, Stu-Boo? I highly recommend that you use a transcription service like rev.com or temi.com to transcribe the interview. You can either have a human transcribe it, that costs a little bit more, or you can use the automated technology that those two services offer, and that's cheaper. And that usually works well for most interviews. It's going to make your life so much easier, trust me. Back in the old days of 2002, I would sit with my little recorder and I'd play it back, try to transcribe it, have to rewind, transcribe it some more. Oh, I love rev.com, and temi.com I hear is really good too. And the AI, the artificial intelligence, works really well and makes your life so much easier. You can always listen back to the Zoom call if for some reason the AI doesn't match up with the words that you're hearing, but it just makes it so much easier. And then you can just kind of like, highlight the messages you want to focus on in the article or pull out quotes. Trust me, it makes it so much easier. And the final tip I have for you is be kind to yourself. If you're new at this, if you're new at interviewing, the first few times are going to feel rough. And let me tell you, even after you've been doing this a long time, like 20 years, you're still going to have moments where you're just, you feel like you got marbles in your mouth, or you're just having a bad day, or you're not on your game. It happens. So be kind to yourself. And here's the thing to keep in mind. The interview is not the project, and it's not the product. The product is your blog post. The product is the white paper or the newsletter article or the piece of writing. So if it's messy in the background to get to the final product, that's okay. Readers aren't going to see that piece. So if you kind of have, a tough time with the interview, or maybe the interview subject is not so great, or maybe they're kind of laid back or whatever, don't worry about it. As long as you have the meat and the messages you need, you can do magic with the writing, because that's what you do. You're also going to want to send a reminder to your interview subject the day before or the morning of the interview. Trust me, I've had that happen more than once, where someone's accepted a Zoom invite, 2 weeks ago, and then the morning of the interview or the day of the interview, they just, they don't pay attention to their calendar, or they just get busy. So it's worthwhile to send that reminder along with however you want people to contact you, whether it's a Zoom link or a phone number and the list of questions, just to kind of jog their memory. Nice touch. Do it. Always show up to the interview early. This is especially important if you're on Zoom or doing something like that where someone has to call in. The last thing you want is to have your client lost in the Zoom waiting room because you're still logging on. So I recommend showing up to the interview 5 minutes early. Just, get into the habit of doing that. It will make life so much easier. If you're having any technical glitches, you'll be able to, double check that, make sure audio's working, and take that deep breath, and you won't seem so harried, and it'll just make for a much better interview. Just get in the habit, even if you tend to be someone who's usually late. How about you? Do you have advice on how to conduct a kick-ass interview for an article or blog post or white paper or guide? Share them in the comments below. Let's get talking. And of course, if you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you didn't like it, don't say anything at all. I am Robin. I am the Copy Bitch. This is Stewie, my sidekick sloth, and we will see you next time.